Hello everyone, Salam, Namaste and Adab, and welcome to today's event at Indian Diaspora Washington DC Metro Forum. Today we have Zara Chowdhary, an Indian writer, producer and educator, winner of an award called Shakti Bhatt Prize for her memoir, The Lucky Ones. She is going to talk on that book. It's a personal account during the Gujarat riots. She will be formally introduced by Mariam Haider, who herself is a writer, researcher, and a spoken word artist, producer, and host of a podcast called Main Bhi Muslim. And the concluding remarks will be given by Nisha Abdullah, a Bangalore-based theater maker, practicing as playwright, performer, director, and educator. All three belong to India. I mean, they are Indian Muslim girls, very bright, upcoming, and it would be nice to hear them all. And we are very happy to have you all. So now I invite Mariam Haider for the formal introductory remarks.
Thank you, Dr. Asiuddin. It is really such a pleasure to be here with everyone today. And thank you, Zara, for inviting me to give the opening remarks. I really want to start with some of the lines that I read in Zara's book. Where you come from does not have to be who you become. I remember reading this line and underlining it when I first read her book because it kind of helped me really sit with all the complexity and the multiplicity of what this Indian Muslim identity has meant for me. And so reading Zara really kind of cemented that understanding and fulfillment of the really many ideas and many realities that we experience growing up as Indian Muslims. And beauty is one of such a hallmark of Zara's writing that much like the cover of Zara's book, it's a piece of bandhani dupatta holding two little girls in its aghosh. Beauty is that glue that holds the book together. It's like a gentle hand that holds the reader through some of the most painful memories and accounts that emerge from the survivors of the Gujarat violence. It's in the Garba nights, in the sunsets and the various hues of it witnessed by Zara's mother from the balcony of their apartment in Ahmedabad. Beauty is in their domestic helper Gulshan's laughter. It is in her sister Misbah's companionship, and it is in the nook of her house where the Janamaz is situated. In remembering the survivors, Zara never forgets to acknowledge their stories beyond the violence. In documenting the story of Ehsan Jafri as the man who saved sparrows, Zara immortalizes him, and with that, his gentleness and his firm belief in justice. In telling the story of her father as the kite flyer, she allows us to sit with the pain and the love she holds for him. In writing about her Pupo, she gives us a glimpse of a fierce woman who stood by her principles and in her own ways taught the girls in the house to fight for their rights, even with their own family members. Zara employs beauty not as an escape, rather as a constant reminder that to seek beauty is actually to seek life. There's beauty in uncovering family history through letters and memories passed down generations across borders. There's beauty in remembrance of the peers and the saints whose last resting sites might be demolished, but their words stay alive. There's beauty in looking back at all the places, knowing that when there is trauma, there was also hope, there was also possibility. Zara writes from a place of that messiness, letting those tight knots unravel in the light of honoring every relationship she takes us along on this journey. Because Zara writes with beauty like it is a memory, like it's survival, and beauty is unapologetic. When I first read Zara's book earlier this year, I found myself in the throes of heartbreak, rejection, and anxiety. And the only routine I could muster was crouch myself onto the palang of my parents' veranda, sit in the winter sun, and make notes on the edges of the copy of The Lucky Ones. Reading Zara write about her young teenage self struggling to make sense of the dysfunctionality that pervaded through her family and then the violence that ensued for days and for months, in some strange way helped me cope with the pain I found myself surrounded by. Her writing invoked in me a renewed sense of fervor to look back at the scars that get imprinted upon us, not in isolation, but rather as part of all the other pieces of what make an Indian Muslim story. The Lucky Ones is then a story of an Indian Muslim life. intertwined in the lives of our neighbors, our classmates, those who emerge as guardians in the least expected moments, and those who make us feel invisible even when we have spent some of the most crucial moments of our lives with. From witnessing the violence, surviving it, and then writing about it, Zara keeps us taking back to her faith in more ways than one. While the world around her tried to perceive her in a certain way, questioning her Muslimness, there was always poetry. There was Sufism. There were stories narrated to her by her grandmother. All those created a mosaic of an Indian Muslim identity that speaks to each one of us in a unique way. In doing so, Zara has created some of the most beautiful understanding of what it means to be an Indian Muslim. And I'd like to conclude with Zara's words that the Islam of Indian Muslims is of good tarbiyat. And this good tarbiyat is what we carry. That is our hallmark of resilience, of joy, of courage, and above all, of belonging in more ways than one. Thank you.
Now the floor is yours or the screen is yours.
Mariam, how do I follow that up? It's um yeah. Yes, I agree with Mr. Jabbar. They're saying impressive. I think there is nothing more impressive in this moment than the resilience and the articulation that Indian Muslims are putting together, and especially Indian Muslim women. I think from Shaheen Bagh to these two beautiful women sitting here with me today, I think there is a way that Indian Muslim women have come to embody the best of us intergenerationally, um, in terms of multi-faith, inter-community building of bridges. Um, I don't know of two stronger people that I could have had here standing beside me. So for me, it's just such a pleasure to be here with both Mariam and Nisha, because I don't walk alone. We walk with each other, and we walk with a million invisible ancestors, who are all carrying us, and hopefully, inshallah, we carry this forward for children to come. So thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Razi Sahab, who is the father of my book designer, the person that did the cover of my book. And that's how I was introduced to your work, to this channel, to seeing all the wonderful things you do here. Um, Thank you to everybody who's gathered here on a Saturday morning or night to listen to us. There's so much going on in the world today, and it's an incredible honor that you've decided and chosen to spend your time this way. But it would be highly remiss if I started out without centering Gaza and without remembering that we are in the middle of an ongoing genocide. And at a time where global Islamophobia and a lot of the tropes and the stereotype and the hate mongering and fear mongering against Muslims that has started, especially in the shadow of 9/11, has reached this sort of all-time peak, including in this country. And so in many ways, I think we're all gathered here drawn by a certain spirit of wanting to be in conversation and wanting to remind ourselves that there's an importance to telling these stories and to continuing to gather in these spaces. So thank you all so much for being here this morning or evening, based on where you are. When I was asked to speak today, I was really thinking about the intimacy of this medium. And even though we're all gathered from all over the world, how lovely it is that I get to talk to all of you about my work, and hopefully give you a sense of what it even felt like to do something like this, to embark on a project like this in the middle of multiple horrors, right? I came to America in 2017. So I was coming into the US a year after Donald Trump's election. I was coming to Iowa, which is, Trump country as much as it gets. I was coming away from the second or third year of Modi's government in India. And so it was very much in the throes of a lot of upheaval, a lot of churn in both places that I would want to call home, and yet two places that do not see me as theirs. And so it was in the midst of this that I was really trying to think about what I wanted to write and how I wanted to come back to writing. And how do you write about the world when you are struggling this much to write about the self? And that was my sort of essential struggle throughout, my 3 years in graduate school. And I really recognized or started to recognize that without acknowledging and without reckoning with who I was and what made me that person, um, everything I was writing, whether it was short fiction, whether it was a novella, a series of poems, were highly false and they rang inauthentic in many ways. Um, and so the lucky ones really came out of a process of sitting with myself in very, very lonely, isolated Iowa with nothing but big blue skies, and as a single parent raising a child who is half Hindu, half Muslim, thinking about what was the world I was giving him, what was the India I was going to tell him about, and who does he carry and what sense of self does he carry if he has to continue to live in America, or anywhere in the world, if the very place of his making is as fractured as India is at this moment. And so that really became the beginning of, or the urge of wanting to tell the story. But, just the fact that we have to keep saying Indian Muslim, as, we've talked about at the beginning today, really captures for you the complexity of what kind of Muslims we are, and how even within the idea of the Indian Muslim, there is no monolith. In the idea of the Indian, there is no monolith. So how can the Indian Muslim then also just be one singular identity, right? And the more I have sat with it over the years, the more I have recognized and come to reckon that just within my one household of a nani who is Konkani, a nana who is half Telugu, half Pathan, a dada who is Punjabi, a dadi who is Gujarati. I am already a household of chaos and mix and beautiful sort of intermingling of what it means to be Indian, right? And so for me, it became this incredible legacy to sit down with and say, well, how do I start to explain to you what kind of Muslims we were? Especially when the kind of Muslims we were today means the kind of Muslims that were hunted down by mobs in 2002. And that is our only identity. Um, and so I figured that what would make sense then is to try and go back to this moment that has haunted me, that has haunted many. Um, when you think of Gujarat and you think of Modi, what you really see and remember are these images, right? You remember the billowing smoke from the Sabarmati Express in February of 2002, the horror of recognizing that 50-something lives have been lost in this fire, the fallout and the aftermath of it, which becomes really reckoned within these two pictures of the man who is made part of the mob to slaughter and rape and pillage Muslim neighborhoods, and the Muslim man who is with his hands folded, begging for his survival and for his life. And these images traveled across the world. They were in the New York Times, they were all across, flashed across screens. And then, of course, the fact that this becomes the path that leads from the highest office of Gujarat, of the chief minister, to the highest office of India, of the prime minister, for Narendra Modi over a period of 14 years, 13 years. And so this has become the story or the sort of veil that has covered everything that we were and the centuries of our history that came before. And so to have had to live with this as a person, a young person growing up in India in the 2000s, in the 2010s, and later on, was to constantly say, oh, where are you from? Yes, I'm from Ahmedabad. Yes, I'm from Gujarat. Oh, you're from Gujarat. And, it's that sort of whisper, the voice dropping, the sense of the shoulders slacking, and people feeling a sense of pity for you, that all you are a victim of something horrific that happened there. And that you carry some sort of vestige, almost like the way Harry Potter carries the mark of what Voldemort has done to the world, that you're just somebody that has a spotlight on them and doesn't understand what it is that they signify. And to me, Ahmedabad was this. Ahmedabad was two little girls growing up in C8 Jasmine Apartments in Kanpur, which used to be a cosmopolitan area, which has now become a ghetto, which was, established by this sort of multi-faith, multi-ethnic community of Parsis and Muslims and Christians and Hindus, Bengalis, Gujaratis, Punjabis, all living together. An apartment, a three-bedroom apartment in which a retired Muslim sales tax assistant commissioner and 7 of his family members lived together, including his 3 granddaughters, of which 2 were born to a Madrasi woman, a woman who loved culture, who loved textiles, who loved art, who loved painting, who loved the sunsets, and who would hand sew little chania cholis for her daughters to wear and go to garbas to. This was my Ahmedabad. This was my life. This was my sense of memory of this place. And so this juxtaposition of what the world knew of us and what we knew of us was the big sort of struggle of how do you start to write story like this. And then I ended up actually in an environmental history course in the course of graduate study. And I remember looking at this old map. I was, of course, because I'm obsessed with Gujarat, I think of Gujarat in so many different ways. And I was looking at this old sort of map from the British era, this hand-drawn idea of Ahmedabad, and you have Sabarmati spelt in the British way there. And if you can see here, the city itself is literally just this fortressed old part of what Ahmad Shah, the Sultan, had built. And this area right here on the eastern banks of Sabarmati was all that was of the city. Khanpur, where I grew up, is one of those areas that are right on the river, on the wall, on the fortress wall of Ahmedabad. And everything, all of this on the west side, across where the sun set for us, was swampland, was, empty, sort of barren land. And today, if you went to Ahmedabad, that's actually where the metropolis is. It's all on the western side. It's these massive malls and massive buildings and huge bridges and all of this infrastructure and the, development model, the Gujarat model is all seen on this western side. And this old city of Ahmad Shah Badshah, which is still fortressed, which is where the ancient monuments are, where the old Bhadra Kali Mandir is the old city that is dwindling and that is ghettoized and where people are lacking jobs and access and education. And our family lived within that. Our community grew within that area. And so I think going back to this really unlocked something for me, this sense of the story of a city itself before it became the story of 2002, before it even became the story of my family. Who was Ahmedabad? What was her spirit? Who built her? Why did they build her? In which spirit did they build her? And so I had a friend, this incredible Dalit artist from India, Percy, who built this map and sort of rekindled or sort of reimagined Ahmedabad for me. And so what we built really was we looked at these ancient drawings and then we looked at Google imagery from now. And then we sat and I started to remind her and tell her what the in between Ahmedabad was. The Ahmedabad that is not now and the Ahmedabad that is not then, but the one that was on the edge of the river across from the modern one of the 90s and what it felt like to grow up just on that edge. that edge that was being left behind, the people that were being abandoned in this move towards modernity, this move towards post-liberalism, this move towards hyper-consumption and consumerism, which has become India. And so I would ask you all to take a minute. Maybe I'm a teacher, so I tend to do these pedagogical things sometimes. Look carefully if you can and tell me what you see. And you can put this in the chat. What are some little symbols or little details that you can see in this map, if at all? See if you can spot an M for McDonald's, because Ahmedabad had the world's first vegetarian McDonald's. See if you can spot a dargah on the old side. See if you can spot buffaloes on the river, because our river was dry. It was not a perennial river. It dried up throughout. It was 8 months of the year it was dry. And only Modi ji came later on and diverted the water of the Narmada and has flooded it now. So now you have a perennially watered Sabarmati, which was not Gandhi's Sabarmati. See if you can find the symbol for a convent school, which Percy very sweetly has embedded across the river from Old Ahmedabad. See if you can find the auto rickshaw that took little Muslim girls from Eastern Ahmedabad to the Western side to this convent school. See if you can find a revolving restaurant, one of India's earliest revolving restaurants called Patang. And so this is the Ahmedabad of the 90s, the one that I grew up in, which was this sort of palimpsest almost of layer upon layer upon layer of story of people trying to coexist. And because Percy is an architect, she's managed to put together this incredible sort of, I think it's called an isometric map or something. But this became a way of me thinking about where I grew up in between these two histories. So the buildings you see in the back here were the only tall buildings of our neighborhood: Jasmine, Firdaus, and was it called Everest? I think it was called Everest, the third one. And we were across from the first Holiday Inn that opened in Ahmedabad. And it was very interesting because we had 8 mosques around us, which would wake up all of us with like 8 different azans, each of them 1 minute after the other. And then you had the Holiday Inn, which on New Year's would have a big New Year's party on the roof, and you would have like American music blaring. So that's the sort of place that I was growing up in. And inside this household, there's the girls in the auto rickshaw going to school. That's my sister, Miss Bhatt at the time, who was not yet ready to go to school, who would come down every single morning. And there was Gullu Mamu, who would take us in our auto rickshaw to school across the bridge. My first few rides to school were with Gullu Mamu for many years. And as I grew older, I started to sit on the front as, you know, one of those students was to sit next to the auto rickshaw driver because you're too tall to fit inside. Um, it was, you know, as much as I laugh and I talk about these things with amusement now, it was also a household of a broken marriage. It was a household in which Zahir, raised by the sort of, you know, government servant, an old barrister's daughter sort of family of like very elite Ahmedabadis, was married to Ruxana, the daughter of a dead army major and a widow, an army widow who did not have the means to match up to them in many ways. Um, and it was a household in which they were raising 2 girls who were not the aspiration of the household. They wanted boys. They wanted children that they could push into the world as the sort of, you know, social climbing Muslims of that era. And so it was also 2 children growing up within a broken marriage. How do you tell that story in the shadow of a pogrom? And to be haunted by 2 stories simultaneously is a lot of haunting for a person to carry in their lives. And so sitting in Iowa with these multiple sort of ghosts became a way for me to think about what India has become from this India that I remember from within the confines of C.H. Jasmine, which was my whole world growing up. And talking of my whole world growing up, I think for any of us here who are children of the 80s and 90s who grew up in India, we were growing up, and Nisha and I talk about this a lot, this sort of sense of almost pride. We're growing up in an era where three Khans are, ruling Bollywood, where later on you have a Muslim president and a Sikh prime minister and a, Italian, Indian, like head of the Congress party. We're talking about democracy in this very alive way. But we're also the children that stood on our tiptoes and looked out of our balconies when Babri Masjid was broken down and like saw the auto rickshaw burn on the street. We saw the motorcycle being burned. We saw our country slowly change. The first time we saw televised national level violence against Muslims was our generation. So it was this sort of contrast of our lives that I needed to also pull into the book. And of course, on the inside, within this household, you'll see little strange signs. So here on the left of the girls is a VCR, or what used to be called a VCP, which my mother's brothers who lived in America at the time had sent us. So we still had we were this weird household that was caught between the past and the future. So we had a 14-inch TV. My father refused to expand from it to a color TV or a bigger TV. And we had a VCR that was American, that was attached to it, on which we watched our cousins going off on these fancy road trips all across America. But we also watched Pakistani soaps that were smuggled from across the border. So it was this interesting and almost insane making chaos in the media that I was taking in. I was also watching, Girish Karnad plays, and I was watching Gujarati movies, and I was watching, Satyajit Ray on television, on Doordarshan, because those are the only two channels we were allowed in our house. And up on the wall, you will see the only two paintings that my mother was allowed to display in this household. She was an artist, she was a painter. And so she would paint and only in her room and be restricted to only reading and painting in her room. And so the only time she was allowed to put two things up by my dadi were these two paintings because they were sort of very minimal and went with the decor that she wanted. And so she used to paint on our clothes. So the dress I'm wearing, my mother painted flowers all over it. And she would paint Diwali greeting cards, by hand, which my dada would then distribute to all his old colleagues. And she would paint on, sort of little tiles and stick them up wherever she could. So it was this sense of both imagining and being told to imagine freedom and being asked to imagine aspiration as an Indian, and yet feeling choked and feel suffocated and feeling claustrophobic on so many different levels, the personal, the political, the social outside us. And so this is a little Gujarati poem by a poet from Ahmedabad, Adil Mansoori, that I'm just going to read quickly for you. It's called Mota Nagar Na Manaso, so people of the big city. चेहरा वगर ना मानसो हेतु वगરની ભીડમાં કારણ વગર ના માનસો જાણે ના ઓળખતા મને મારા જ ઘરના માણસો. And I love that line, જાણે ના ઓળખતા મને મારા જ ઘરના માણસો. The idea that your own people in your own home will know you, but will they recognize you? And so this idea of what does it mean to be known and what does it mean to be recognized? And that difference within a household, but also within a city, and also within a state, and also within the country. The next line says, Akhbar akhu vachta vasi khabar na manaso. So these people who read the whole newspaper, broadsheet to broadsheet, and yet all they have is basi khabar. They only have old news. Ran ret ma dubi gaya, pani vagar na manaso. So a land that is actually dust, right? Ahmedabad, so close to the Run of Kutch, so close to the desert, We used to have dust storms. We used to have what you call the loo, the hot air that blew in from the desert in the summer. And so the people that are drowning in sand and without water, those people, Paki sadak ni shodma, kachi kabar na manso. So the people that are so in search for the pakki sadak, the street that is well mowed and well laid, that they are actually the people of the unmarked grave, the kachi kabar. And so this contrast of who we were told to aspire to and who we really were um, became actually the story of the lucky ones, because you do not get to genocide. You do not get to a pogrom without unmet aspirations and without a sense of being choked and being pushed into these claustrophobic conditions by the state and sometimes by family. On the left up here, you have us at a nativity scene because convent schools did nativity scenes for Christmas, and they sometimes had live babies as baby Jesus. On the right up there is us in kindergarten performing Cinderella. I was the fairy godmother, so that's me with the crown. And even within this picture, there's a Parsi kid, there's a Christian kid, there's a Muslim English professor's grandchild. There's my mother with a very ill-informed perm that she used to get at the time from our neighbor, Armiti auntie, who was a Parsi who ran a salon in Firdaus in the building next to us. That's the Sabarmati, and there you see the Reth and the Run, the dry, almost desertification of a river. And on the left here is all of our family downstairs in Jasmine Building with our Jain friends, very, very close Gujarati Jain friends, who actually harbored us in their home a year before the pogrom when the Gujarat earthquake happened. So when the earthquake happened, all of us moved across the river into the bungalow of a Gujarati Hindu family and lived with them for a month. And then the very next year, when the Gujarat pogrom happens, we don't even receive a phone call from the same people. The story of our family, but also of the state, cannot be told without the story of these two men that haunt me. One, of course, is the Prime Minister of India now, but who was our Chief Minister at the time, and the other is my father. When I was writing this book, I remember there was a point at which my editor looked at me and said, do we really need another story of a brown man who, is not fair to his family and is cruel to his wife and children? And I remember saying to her, there were times when the way my father looked at me or looked at something that he despised, and I have seen that look sometimes in Mr. Modi's eyes, in the way that he looks when he says something particularly cruel about people. Um, and so, how do I not feel haunted by two male patriarchal figures in my lifetime, right? But it's also a story of strange, sort of serendipitous interconnection and division, because here at the bottom you see Zahir, again, sort of brought up in this more upper class of Ahmedabad, raised to join the cricket team, studied at Elphinstone in Bombay. He was born where Gujarat was still part of Bombay state, and then saw the bifurcation of Gujarat and Maharashtra. He went to the best of institutions, spoke, fantastic English, went away to study, well, came away to study in America in the 70s, was a real 70s child wearing the flared bottom pants, and in California, just, having the time of his life. All of this on not sort of family wealth, because this was not a family that had wealth. They just had connections, and they had what you call, like pehchan. They knew people around them. The other man, also born in post-independence India and who takes much pride in it, is the prime minister. But he grew up within Gujarat, joining the RSS cadre and becoming really the sort of backseat navigator of the movement, and realizing that there was a true disconnect between where some people were in post-independence India and others had been left behind. and learning how to channel that rage into something more specific. Um, on the other hand, you had people like my father who were sort of just bumbling through this post-independence India with a sense of joy, with a sense of, we are the Muslims who chose this India. And so this is ours as much as it is somebody else's. It is ours to grow in, ours to fail in, ours to succeed in as much as it is somebody else's. And with a lot of sort of noble sense of service and purpose, my father came back from America to join the Gujarat Electricity Board and work in government service the same as his father had. And so you have this family where one side has worked in government service, the other one has served in the army. You have two, in my very biased opinion, very beautiful people that are brought together in marriage across Gujarat and Tamil Nadu, and tied in this very unhappy marriage. Across their own internal differences of language, of culture, but a strange sense of caste, which was very interesting for me to sit with as I was sitting with this book, because this was a story of caste that existed in the society outside of us. And it also had somehow perpetuated in the home inside. And what I mean by that is that when you grow at this certain pace of aspiration and always wanting to climb up, and the hierarchy is so embedded in you and high wired in you, all you can think is of those ahead, and you cannot see who you are leaving behind. That becomes the story of a society, and that is where resentment grows. And in the same way, I think when you are looking at marriage through the lens of rishta and arranged marriages and whose daughter can you bring into the house that will allow you to grow more, as versus whose daughter has come in and made you somehow lesser in a way, that sense of caste, which transcends just touch and transcends the idea of untouchability. It becomes almost the idea of whose presence makes you less pure, whose presence makes you less able to achieve this ideal that you have in your head. These two stories became sort of very interesting as a parallel in my head. And yet, I think for me, the crux of it, the part that I could most root myself down in, was the fact that this was a story of girls. This was a story of not just three girls who were being raised in a strangely loving and yet unloving and harsh home. You have a dada and dadi, you have a divorced puppu, you have a couple that don't love each other, and you have drinking, you have alcoholism, you have a household where people are not able to pay bills and buy groceries, but they will buy a bottle of booze because that's how dependent the man of the house has become on alcohol. You have three girls who are pushed into competition with each other, almost like a Jane Austen novel. Um, you have girls who are still being told to wear the chanya choli and go do garba and like winning at garba competitions. You have girls who are from Yemen and who are from Dubai, who are different kinds of Muslims, who are teaching you what it means to wear an abaya, teaching you what it means to read your namaz properly, comparing their Muslimness with you. And then you have this outside world of the convent school, from which most girls refuse to come to your side of the city because it's too smelly, it's too dirty, it's too Muslim, it's too crowded. Um, and the few that come have to sit on the floor and eat samosa and chana chaat, and that is the extent of your whole girlhood. So it became this sort of strange way of thinking about what does it mean to be a young girl and in the body of a young girl when a pogrom happens. And then, of course, there's only that much you can write in the past, because who I was at 16 had tried to write the story. I went into a visual communications major. I then went and studied writing for performance in Leeds in the UK. I worked in film. I wrote for advertising. I did all of these things. And I would keep having this sense in my head that mere, halak mein kuch atka hai, something is stuck in my throat, and I'm not able to get stories past the thing that is stuck in my throat. And so almost everything I wrote constantly just sounded false to me. It didn't sound rooted in a reality that I had lived. I would be writing this very sort of Karan Johar-esque, world that is not a world I understood. Or the sort of like, once you had Gangs of Wasipur and that kind of cinema, that kind of like earthy central India cinema of people that, again, I didn't understand. But I had also, in that, had the opportunity to get away from a pogrom and grown to learn my craft in all these different ways, grown to learn how to see the world in all these different ways, how to speak about the world in these different ways, and how to love the world beyond Gujarat in these ways. And so when people say, they ask me a lot when I'm on tour, is this a book about survivor's guilt? And I find that a very strange framing, because what does it mean to survive, to leave the place that so scared and terrified you, and to travel into the world and to constantly be hit by beauty, right? When everything you come from has felt ugly and has reminded you of ugliness and of the worst that humans are capable of, what does it then mean to sit by the ocean, to learn how to ride a horse? What does it mean to sit on the moors in England and look out at the world that you read in your childhood books? It actually means that the longing inside you for that world increases, and the longing inside you for the place where your dead are buried only grows. And for me, it's that longing that really brought me back to wanting to tell the story. And yet, by the time I sat down to write this story, this piece had actually just come out, India's Divider in Chief by Atish Tasir. And he has a book that's come out now where he's, talking about how the fallout of just writing this piece, because when Atish wrote this in Time magazine was just in the first term of Modi. And he was one of the first people whose OCI, which a lot of you on this call would know what it is, the Overseas Citizenship Identity Card, his OCI was taken away for writing this article. And here I am, a daughter of Gujarat, on a student visa with a student stipend and a little child that I'm raising, hiding in Iowa, remembering that while all of these things are going on in the world, and now all of India is waking up to realize who this man is and what Gujarat is and what happened, and they're taking to the streets and protesting citizenship bills. The person that thought of him in the same breath as she thought of her father, was sitting hiding in this little tiny student town, this college town in America. And all I had with me was two things: the story of those who made it through the pogrom, like Bilkis Banu, and her testimony, and the testimony of so many people who so bravely came before courts and tribunals and committees to tell their story over and over and over again till their stories were raw and wounded and smelt like burnt flesh. And I had the story of Ruxana and her two girls, and what it meant to live within a Muslim household, within a pogrom, within a place that was governed by these people. And how do I tell these two stories while the world outside me is this threatening present force, right? And so writing The Lucky Ones is about more than survivor's guilt. It is actually almost my manual on how to survive right now. And so I think this, like Mariam sort of started out and so beautifully said, I ended up really going back, sort of like an excavation project, and said, what is the beauty I can excavate? If there is this family that, the mother still wears her Kanjivaram saris, and these children are having this incredible English language education, and their school opens up the world for them. Their grandfather, teaches them to read the Quran, takes them to see these living monuments of Islamic history around them. is the retired old Chaudhry Sahab, who now is the president of the Lokaf Waqf Board, and looks at the masjids and the dargahs and takes us on little tours on Thursday to see all the peers and the mosques around us and do salam, and teaches us and says, "Beta, dekho that grave or that monument, you need to protect this." What is this beauty that you can harness in a way that nobody can take away from you? Not the past, not the present, not whatever horror is coming into the future, right? Um, and so mapping these things to sort of think about all of the sites of cruelty, all of the sites of burning humans en masse, of burying bones and shreds of people in mass graves, of emptying entire neighborhoods of Muslims and bulldozing over them and building in its place a mall, building in its place a new sign of a shining India in which Muslims don't belong. The book became a way for me to go back and think of those places as shrines, that I would transcend the child who was raised on dargahs and who was raised on shrines. I would think of the people that died in my lifetime as those saints of those shrines, which is when somebody like Ehsan Jafri became such a figure for me and such a guiding force for me, thinking about his poetry, his life, his service to people, and ultimately his very Christ-like sacrifice for his people in the Gulbarg massacre. And how do I then zoom out from that, Ahmedabad, to think about the fact that Gujarat is the lab where everything that we know about India today was practiced and tested, that we were the guinea pigs and the lab rats on whose bodies these agendas were first tried out. And how easy it was to do in a place that is bordered by Pakistan on one side, the desert on the other side, and the ocean on the third side. People who feel trapped, people who feel a constant set of fears of the other, who are constantly living in a sense of monstering and othering the things that they don't recognize. Um, and how do I think of the Dada who left Gurdaspur and came to Bombay and was raised by a Muslim professor and who became this incredible man who raised us and taught us? How do I think of Chennai, which is where we fled to, which is where the ocean really felt like it rescued us in the end? How do I think of Bangalore, where a Hindu family had a house that was named Ayodhya and a child named Ram, and where we went every summer and spent our summers traveling the forests of South India with them? Um, so much of this writing became about mapping the body, the family, the land. Um, but as one of my favorite sort of colleagues and historians here in Iowa, where I teach, Ashley, she said this incredible thing to me, that history is as much an act of investigation as it is an act of imagination. And to me, that really feels, it resounds very strongly, because that's really what the book became. It became an act of both investigating and thinking of what I could report back from the past, but it was also an active way of reconstituting the past. Because if so much has been looted and raped and pillaged and taken away and murdered and erased, how do I rehydrate that? How do I reconstitute? How do I reanimate that past? Um, and so I don't know how many of you know or recognize this, but this is um, the Sidi Sayed Jali, it's called. So it's a Jali, it's one piece of rock that has been carved into this sort of tree of life image. It's part of three incredible Jalis or lattice work windows that are part of a mosque built by Sidi Sayed in Ahmedabad. And it is also the official icon of Gujarat tourism. And so when dignitaries from across the world come to Gujarat, and when Modi ji was our chief minister, he used to gift this window of a mosque to the Japanese Prime Minister and to, people from Europe and all over the world. And the Siddhi Sayyid Mosque is built by and for General Siddhi Sayyid, who was an African, a black general in the army of Ahmad Shah. So that is Gujarat also. It is the Gujarat of a very, very ancient thread of Islam, a place where Islam entered on its own terms and existed on its own terms. It had nothing to do with the Islam of Central India. It had nothing to do with the Islam of the Mughals or Delhi. It was its own assertive version. And I live 2 blocks from Siddhi Sayyid's Jali. I have read many namazes as a child in Siddhi Sayyid's masjid. And this was one of the places that my dada took me to every Thursday to just look at the lattice work and remember that this is also where we come from. And so it is this sense of sort of covering the dead and bringing back dignity to those who were not even allowed that dignity in their death. Reconstituting not only your own family and its own troubles, but the lost histories of a people. And that sort of project takes quite a bit out of you. And so especially when it came down to actually publishing the book and putting it out into the world, I was working with, Razi Sahab's daughter, Arsh, and I finally had a meeting and I was able to talk to her face to face. After a lot of sort of intermediaries, telling her what the book is, telling me what the cover should be, and whatever, we finally were able to talk to each other. And I remember just saying that this book is an elegy. It is me trying to put flowers on the graves of those who are buried in mass graves. It is me trying to respond to a childhood where I was not allowed to speak a word, and silence was the language in our household. And it is also the beauty that my mother painted over our lives, despite all the ugliness around us. I remember showing her that picture of my sister and me in the auto rickshaw going to school and telling her that, Arsh, when people leave in the middle of a pogrom and you flee, and we're seeing this in Gaza right now with so many young children and families and mothers and fathers, right? You just take what you can carry. And what that means is, depending on how much time you have, you pack your most important documents, you pack your immediate clothes, your immediate needs. But there were things like those uniforms that we used to wear to school. And I remember when I left school, my friends had all scribbled little notes and good luck wishes on it. And I lost that. There were books in which little Zara had first started to write and write these stories. Those books are gone. I had folders in which I used to love to collect all these gowns from Miss Universe and Miss World pageants because I grew up in the era of Sushmita Sen and Aishwarya Rai. Those folders are gone. And I was like, I know how much Americans of all colors and shades, Americans love their material history. They have these enormous houses and these massive basements and these huge garages that are filled with, when I was in third grade, I did this thing. And when I was 2 years old, my parents have still collected this drawing I made. And I was like, when people leave in the middle of a disaster and a crisis and violence, they're leaving with all of that packed only in their bodies. And so I need a cover that shows you what you're left with and what do you carry. Um, and it had to be white because it had to be a mourning for these people. And that's how we ended up with this incredible cover. But I just thought that this would be a nice way to sort of bring you through the journey of a book and the journey of what it means to be a writer who was allowed the privilege and allowed the luxury of living and surviving and fleeing, and then allowed the generosity of so many people who taught her and who honed and chiseled her craft, and what that coming back home to write about home would look like. And I hope in some way this is of use for you as you read the book or have read and are thinking about it, to really consider what it means when the one book like this makes it not only out of India, but into what is a very big and busy American publishing market. And then all we're told is, oh, you're such a cautionary tale for America. This is what America could become. And, this is what we might be heading towards. And when you don't want to be a cautionary tale for America, you just want to be the story of your own people. That for me is the lucky ones. So thank you for listening. Thank you for so patiently letting me drone on about my beloveds. And I see Nisha's lovely face there. So Nisha, do you want to take over now? Thank you, everyone.
Zara, what do I say? Zara is constantly making me cry, making me feel, making me think. Reading Zara's book in the middle of everything that's going on in the world, everything that is going on in India, in Bangalore, in the state of Karnataka. It was difficult. To listen to it now feels like a new entry point. And I think every time I talk about the book to someone or introduce it to someone, and my mother is reading the book now, and I can't wait to discuss things with her. And every time I'm able to talk about it more, I discover something else about the book. I think about a thread that maybe I hadn't thought of before from the book. So, Zara, thank you for writing this, for putting yourself through the pain again and again. I'm familiar with that, with what that is like, but from a very different kind of entry point. But little bit I have a grasp of what it is to kind of go back to wounds. So thank you for being that voice and for giving so many of us who have such vivid memories of Babri Masjid, yes, but also Godhra. I was 8, living in Muscat when Babri happened. And it's one of the images that's really seared in my head, watching on television and feeling that sense of fear in the room. It's very palpable. I didn't know exactly what was going on, but that silence and that fear is what I remember most. I was in college when Godhra happened. And I remember not knowing who to be able to talk about this with. I remember rushing to the library to see newspapers, in the morning before college. So when you give us a book like this, before anything else, I was also just deeply admiring of your craft and very envious of it. To be able to, go the expanse that you have to traverse the personal, the political, but loop it back into the personal, and show us how tightly woven those are. And then to go into the depths of both your family history, and the pain and the ways in which it has shaped so many lives, to do that with such finesse. I think that's what stands out for me most of all, while I was reading, is that it's not just a memoir. It's also just a feat of craft. And and it, as the artist in me is very envious of what you were able to do as well. You spoke about that edge, you know, and I feel like we're constantly there. We're constantly on that edge. And in being on that edge, in kind of trying to find meaning and metaphor, I suppose, also on that edge, we're constantly trying to hold so many multiple parts of ourselves, like you so wonderfully said in your talk. We're also constantly trying to hold the past with the present, with a future that's so uncertain. And in all of this, there's also the multiples that exist in all of us, in all of us, just as Indian Muslims. Like you said, the sheer diversity amongst us, both in terms of histories, in terms of experiences of our Muslimness, the intensities of our Muslimness, the expressions of our Muslimness, and our fights with our Muslimness as women. And in all of this, when we hold all of these contradictions, to me, that is also what it means to hold the secular, to be able to be in conversation constantly with these contradictions within ourselves, with these complexities within ourselves, with the contradictions between me and another in the relation. To me, that is the very task of being secular, the very actioning of being secular. So when we look at the plight of the Indian Muslim today, yes, for me, there is, a lot of what you've discussed in your book. There is fear, there is insecurity, there is uncertainty, but there is also tremendous confidence that we know how to do this. We know how to hold these contradictions. We know how to, there is a long and beautiful history of being able to contest, of being able to hold our ground. And so for me, the question as the artist in this present time, also as an educator in this present time, is how do we tell the story of flawed men, flawed people, of women who are also victims, but not only victims? How do we tell these stories in its fullness, in all of its complexities? And how do we leave this behind also in a way that's different from being left behind? And that then becomes the responsibility. For me personally, Shaheen Bagh was a big moment. I think I can divide my personal life and my artistic journey into pre-2019, pre-sit-in movement moment, and post, because it really brought right to the center what it means to resist. What are the tools we have? My body, my voice, our bodies, our voices, all of our multiple selves. And if we can be in conversation with that, that itself is our biggest resistance. How do we kind of remain in that conversation? How do we center that what we need to do now in order to be able to put our feet in the future, so that no one gets left behind? And the responsibility that we collectively hold in this room, in multiple rooms that we're in. How do we carry our communities with us and center that, not ourselves, but the people we're carrying with us constantly, to keep reminding ourselves that we're here in rooms like these in other rooms that we have access to, by accident. It's just an accident of birth and fate and luck and privilege. But how do we kind of carry everyone else into that room? I'm always telling my students that we are peopled by many other people. And so to keep kind of centering that, and to come back to your book allows me a way, to do that. I also kind of want to, when we talk about memory, when we talk about resistance, what are other cultures also that we kind of learn from? Within India, there is a very strong oral culture and artistic culture of resistance from the Dalit community. And what kind of solidarities are we building within the DBA community here? There is an increasing number of voices amongst queer Muslims, and there is a lot of memoir work that is happening there. There is a lot of articulating and reconciling with very violent pasts as well that is happening. So in all of this memory making and sense making and articulating, who else are we also learning from? Who else are we bringing into our circles of awareness, of trust, of acknowledgement? And to remember also that, within these many struggles lies that connected thread for all of us. Yeah, it's very difficult to follow you, Zara. But one last thought before I stop. When you say mapping sites of cruelty, it reminds me just yesterday, Sabika Abbas, who is one of my favorite human beings, for just the sheer fire and beauty in her words. Yesterday, and I'm going to read this out so I don't mess it up. Yesterday, she put out a video of her performance at the Sydney Opera House, and I teared up at the fact that we have, this young, incredible voice carrying our story there, all the way there. And she was so incredible. She was so brilliant. She was unshakable. And she said this line, she said, she recited a beautiful poem, but she said this one thing which really stayed with me, which is that I want to write about dewdrops on my eyelids and velvety grass beneath my feet. But not today. Today, the air still smells like the blood of our people, and I must write the truth. And I think somewhere there is our collective calling as artists, as just people witnessing each other's pain. And how do we keep telling that truth? How do we keep mapping sites of cruelty? Yes, but also sites of joy, sites of resistance. How do we hold all of that in its incredible complexity? But how do we keep doing that, and how to keep learning from each other to do that? Thank you, Zara, for this incredible honor of saying something in response to what you've said. Your book, I teach. There are chapters that I teach. There are passages that I read. It's always on my bedside, except for when Mum took it. I have gifted it already many times. And it fills me with so much pride that your book will outlive all of us. And it will be one of the many books, but it will be one of those books that will tell, this moment in history, and it will tell it with all its ugliness and beauty, all of it. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It was really wonderful. Before I go to question and answer session, It is just an announcement for the coming Saturday. As you all know, Professor Zoya Hassan, perhaps one of the leading historians in India at the time, she is going to talk on Muslim identity, rights, and representation in India. She will be joined by Dr. Hilal Ahmed and also by Dr. Amir Ali, who is not yet on the poster, for coming Saturday. Before I leave this to Dr. Rafat Hussain, take this out, Faisal. I just want to show a picture of our daughter who made your your book cover. As they say that her book covers speak. So your book cover really speaks your story. So Arshi is not here. She avoids confronting me. So probably, but she knows. And we are very proud that she made the cover for you. Your story is very captivating. It's just reminding me a great novelist, Garcia's 100 Years of Solitude. It is like great stories are always written with pain, but also with pleasure. Thank you. And Dr. Rafat Hussain is going to have the questions. The session is your host now.
Thank you, Dr. Aziuddin. Oh, Zara, what a beautiful, captivating talk. So she walked us through the memory lane of her childhood. At one point, you feel very sad and you keep going on. You don't want to listen any word of her narration. What a beautiful job she has done. Thank you so much, Zara, and Mariam Heather and Nisha Abdullah for a beautiful introduction and, of course, the concluding remark. So we are going to open the question and answer session. So there are two options. You can raise your hand, digital hand, or you put your comment or question in the chat box, and I will continue to monitor both of them. And I will switch between digital hand and the comment box. So let's see. There are so many beautiful comments, you see, Zara. So I don't have to read them. I will only take the questions. So let's begin with the digital hand. And I see Tariq Farooqi Saab.
Thank you, Rafat. I don't have a question. I just have a few comments and observations. Mariam, Nisha, and Zara, great work. Thank you. You guys were very impressive. Actually, my son, Mansoor, who lives in New York, Brooklyn, he recommended your book to us. And when I got the book, I noticed in the flap that it was designed, the cover was designed by Razi's daughter. Razi is a friend of ours. So immediately we had an attractive book in front of us. And when I read it, Zara, wonderful storyteller. You're very articulate. I did not know that you were that articulate. I read your book first, but I heard today that you speak very, very well. Congratulations. I like your conversational style. And in your book, even when you describe a flawed family relationship, I mean, so honestly, and terrifying political and societal environment around you, and how you describe, people change. And you mentioned that people where you spent the previous summer, and then you could not go back again after what happened in Gujarat. I mean, it was painful to read, but you expressed it very well. Finally great to hear articulate young Muslim girls who can express themselves eloquently. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm looking more comments, or otherwise I'm gonna to put some people on the spot. And why not I begin with Ishrat Aziz Saab. Would you like to say something? Ishrat Bhai?
Yes, I would like.
Please go ahead.
How with what
I,
rationale?
I'm gonna to
But
turn your camera.
I really, have I got the camera on? Yeah, I think. And can you hear me?
Yes, very
Yeah.
well.
I really, it was a privilege to listen to the talk today. Congratulations to Zara, Mariam, and Nisha. I would say that, and I have said it in the comment, that while it's a kind of elegy, it ends on a note of courage and the determination to carry on. She spoke beautifully. Zara spoke beautifully. I must say I have not read the book, but I'm going to get it and read it. She has so effortlessly woven so many strands together: personal life, events that took place in in uh, in Gujarat, and also generally about life itself and what life is all about and what life means. The struggle. The most important thing is, to me, what I felt was the struggle, the determination and struggle that is clearly there throughout her talk. I must say that I find it very encouraging that somebody has taken up this theme which most people like to avoid.
Yeah.
But and she has put it so effectively. Congratulations to all the three of you. And as I said, the first thing I'm going to do is to tell my daughter to order a copy, and I will read it. And I would certainly, if possible, like to convey my comments to her. I'll ask Razi, with her permission, to give me her contact number. Thank you.
I will.
So all three speakers, Zara, Mariam, and Nisha, if you don't know, the Ishrat Aziz Saab, he's a senior Ali. He's living in the US and he has been ambassador, India's ambassador to many different countries. If I am not wrong, 5-6 countries. And he's retired now and living with her daughter, his daughter here. So that's the background of Ishrat Aziz Saab. Thank you so much. And okay, the next one is Ambreen Al-Qadar. Ambreen, please.
Yes, I can. Thank you, Rafat sir. Hi, Zara. I've been kind of off and on spoken to Nisha and Mariam, so I follow your work with a lot of, I love what all of you do. And this is just such a phenomenal book. I think I have to start my video too. So
Yes,
just
you have.
Yeah, please.
it's just such a phenomenal piece of writing, the perspective that, it has sort of brought forth the voice of women and just sort of the perspective of women and then blending the personal and the political. And I think it's just so relevant to our current moment. Nisha, you spoke about Shaheen Bagh, and one of there is such a lack of writings by Muslim women. Like I feel that I was really, so the book really filled that void for me in such a beautiful way. Are there any plans to work on like an Urdu translation? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because you talked about Shaheen Bagh, Nisha. And that's a place, I mean, I go back to Jamia. I've sort of studied in Jamia. I've taught there, lived and grew up there. And when I go there, I always think about what did the Shaheen Bagh moment mean? I mean, in 2019, it just sort of radically changed the way we perceived ourselves. This idea that we have power. And now when I go there, I look at the lives of ordinary everyday women, and I wonder what would it mean for them to read something like this. I mean, and a lot of the women who live in areas which are ghetto neighborhoods, you were talking about ghettoization in your own work. where the ability to speak in English, the ability to have access to materials like you and I have. And, I think of that space, like what it would be for them to read this brilliant work, which I think maybe is something that, in terms of having a translated version in Hindi or Urdu, that would be brilliant. But again, thank you so much for this beautiful talk. I was just listening to all of you. I know you're all amazing and brilliant, and thank you for this time. So yeah, I just wanted to sort of share those thoughts with you.
Thank you so much, Amreen. I'll just quickly respond to that. And I also just love that all of us get flowers every time I get flowers. That is why I'm here. I brought these two because I need them to also, the world should know these two incredible beauties. In terms of translation, actually, Sabika Abbas Naqvi, who Nisha spoke about, is working on a translation with me, but we're looking for a publisher. So if you know of a really strong, effective Hindi Urdu publisher, please let us know. We had a publisher and it seems like that's not working out and there's something going on there. So if you have options, please let us know. There is a Tamil version coming, which I am very excited about, because if a part of India really saved me and resurrected my hope in India, it was Tamil Nadu. So the fact that there's a Tamil version coming means a lot. But those are the two Indian language translations in progress right now.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, lovely.
Thank you.
Rafat, can I just say
Yeah.
10 seconds?
Yeah, please go ahead.
Just to introduce Ambreen. She is just like you, probably not from Gujarat. She's from UP, from my hometown. And she is doing a lot of documentary and all kind of activism related to what you all probably three do. And she's based here in Midwest in Chicago. And she is also related to me. So my younger brother's sister-in-law and sort of younger sister to me. Thank you, Ambreen. So
thank you, Razi bhai. Thank you.
Being today present, otherwise you are always absent.
I
Okay.
want to catch Zara's talk. I
Okay,
mean, everything is
welcome to the
great.
forum. Okay, the next is Dr. Syed Amir, please.
Thank you. First of all, Zara and all three speaker ladies, I want to join in the chorus of compliments and admirations the various people have expressed about your book and the way you present it today. Thank you for that. A couple of questions come to my mind. First of all, your description is so emotive, so powerful, so emotional. Did I wonder what, when you were writing it, what was in your mind, what was the potential audience you were addressing it? Was it some specific audience you had in mind, or you just was expressing or an outlet of your own emotions and your own thoughts and your experiences? Second is a little bit more historic, and because I wonder if Gujarat state had such a long experience historic of Muslim culture ruled by sultans, Muslim history all pervading, but seems paradoxically where it has been a home of people which are narrow-minded. I mean, I start with Patel and of course Modi and others. This seemed to be a paradox. So if you could address these questions, I will appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Syed Amir Sahab. I'll take the second part first because I'm just thinking about that actively right now. But Gujarat, I think it's the paradox that actually is emblematic of India in many ways, right? This sense that there are these richer histories, not only of Islamic legacy, of Christian legacy, of Buddhist legacy, of a very, very rich folk and Dalit and Adivasi Bahujan legacy. But we also have what you would think of as this sort of capitalist legacy. And the hierarchy, the social hierarchy and the economic hierarchy, which predates colonialism, and which, if anything, I think colonialism just exacerbated and sort of really, they sensed what was already rotten, as Ambedkar has called our society, what was already broken, and just sort of managed those tensions in a way that helped them. And I don't think Gujarat or Ahmedabad, for that matter, was very different to that sort of very intuitive management of groups. So you had a place that was the capital of the Gujarat Sultanate, but which had also then fallen to the Marathi Gaikwad monarchy afterwards, and then very easily and quickly fell to the British, and it was a cantonment city. It was also a city that was known as the Manchester of the East. It was where all of the textile mills and the humongous sort of migration of textile mill workers happened in the 19th and early 20th century. So you've got Muslim artisans who are able to do hand block printing and textile weaving, but you also have Dalit artists and Dalit weavers who are losing jobs when migrant labor comes in. And so even in post-independence India, what you really saw was a state, I think Veer Sanghvi had written about this at some point, that was a state which felt like it had once had that limelight, the state of Gandhi. Oh, are you, sorry, saying something?
Can you?
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's fine. And so you have a state which was the state of Gandhi, which was, Sabarmati ke Sant and Porbandar and the Dandi March, and you have that history. But at the same time, you have a state that is then left behind. It has the lowest education access in its minorities. It has some of the lowest in general education sort of results and whatnot in the country. So you are seeing a place that was over decades really left behind in the national imagination and taken over then by this capitalist kind of post-liberal imagination, especially in the 90s. So we saw with our own eyes in very micro ways, how the Maruti 800 first flooded our streets, and the Honda and, all these things came in, the washing machines and the fridges and the dishwashers and the amphitheater systems in people's homes. And so what was happening across the country, this leaving behind of a certain India for the India that was running westward, was also running towards consumerism. The same split has happened in Gujarat and specifically in Ahmedabad, where there is a lot of capital and a lot of old industrial money and then a lot of new industrial money because it's a government that's pro-capital.
But
Sorry,
don't
I forgot
forget
the first question, but I want to make sure I take more questions.
Right. But briefly, if you could describe the first question, is respond
Yes,
to
my
that.
audience. When I was writing this, is actually it really kind of became a book when Shaheen Bagh happened and when the anti-CA and anti-NRC protests in India started, because I saw so many people who were younger than Nisha and I, so folks who are 20, 21 at the time, taking the stage and speaking about sort of asserting and affirming Muslim identity in India in a way that was still very central, North Central India, a very Urdu driven and very kind of, Urdu poetry and driven by the same legacy of like partition and the freedom movement and so on. And I would hear things like, they did Gujarat and now they want to do this all over India. And like Gujarat was just, the model and now it's going to be all over India. But I saw a huge gap there in what they even understood about what Gujarat was and what they therefore understood about what a Muslim life in the periphery of India is. What is a South Indian Muslim life? What is a Gujarati Muslim life? What is a Bengali Muslim life? How do we experience and then express our Muslimhood in these myriad ways across India, right? And so for me, it became both a sense of asserting and rewriting that story back into this compendium of Muslim stories, but to also say that you are not alone in this fight. It is not just you in Delhi and you in Lucknow who has to fight this. We are all with you, with our stories, with our wounds, with our past that are coming back. So I thought about the Zara who is 16 now in India and the Misbah who is 16 now in India. And how do I put this book in their hands?
Thank you, Zara.
Thank you.
In the interest of time, let's move on. Nazir Ahmad, Dr. Nazir Ahmad, please.
The poetry and prose, a work of art and description. How does one follow such a beautiful presentation? The only other book that comes to mind that had similar impact on me was something that was published at the height of partition in August of 47 called Khoon Ke Aansu. It was soon banned, and we had to read it in the attic in my grandfather's house, hiding from people. I'd like to just pick up on one thread in this very beautiful presentation, that is knowing and recognition. There is a beautiful hadith. It says, Man arafa nafsahu, faqad arafa rabbahu. He who knows himself, or she who knows herself, knows God. And similarly, one who knows God knows himself or herself. Very often when we read these things or look at a work of art or hadith or something like that, we pay attention to the words and we don't pay enough attention to the huruf that go into the words. The arafa is such a beautiful word. Ain, re, fe. Ain is for ilm, that's to know. The re is for ruya, that's to witness, to see. And fe is fahima, to accept, to comprehend. As you beautifully brought out, knowing, does my mother know myself? I'm presenting myself to my mother again and again. This is the analogy in India. Muslims presenting themselves to Mother India, and very often they're told, well, do I recognize you? But then in between is the witness part of it. And history consists of two streaks. One is a streak of light from the heavens, from Allah. And the other one is a streak from the devil. And human beings are both. And the history of Gujarat is a compendium of both. It's amazing with the finesse, the beauty with which you have handled this pockmark on the face of the history of India with sensitivity, a work that's bound to become a work of art in the future. Mabruk Mubarakbad. May God bless you.
Thank you. Next is Neeraj Kumar Lal, please. Neeraj sir, I ask you to unmute, discuss that issue. Okay, let's move on to the Ishrat Aziz Saab again.
Yes, I have just a question for Zara. And it is this: how did it feel like writing this book? Was it a churning experience or was it a cathartic experience? How did you feel after you had written it? Thank you.
Similar question, Zara.
Thank you, Ishrat, for that question. I think the churning and the catharsis is in the book, and it happens beyond the book. And I think that to actually speak to Neeraj Saab's words from earlier, that is the experience of living in the complex reality of India right now, that you will churn with the sort of inequity and the gross disparity and the gross injustice in how some groups are treated over others at this moment. But you will also have moments of catharsis. Somebody actually asked me about the structure of the book, of why I have this sort of non-linear structure. And I told them it's because I grew up, because memory of any trauma is not linear. And so you write it in a way that you map that memory. but B, because I grew up on Bollywood cinema. And what happens when things get too hard? They break into song and they have an escape and they give you a place of catharsis. And so for generations, Indians have come to the cinema hall saying, life is hard as it is. I am here for 3 hours. Take me away. Take me somewhere that I can dream and believe and escape and feel more human, right? And so for me, the book is nonlinear because I'm constantly bringing us back from the worst of us and our worst excesses, and the worst things that have ever happened to a person. Because again, to Neeraj Saab's point, we are not only a result of the worst things that have happened to us. We are a product of all the beauty that has happened to us as well. And so to interject that and to bring it in is to remind oneself of your Indianness, within which resides your Muslimness, within which resides your womanhood, within which resides your girlhood, within which perhaps resides your upper casteness, which you must also contend with. So there are many ways in which one can think of both catharsis and conflict in the writing and in the living. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that great answer. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful answer. Okay, Victor Ghalib Saab. Victor Ghalib Beg, please. I ask you to unmute.
Assalamu alaikum.
Walaikum.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You know, my question is, first of all, I want to really appreciate the articulation and the intellect which was presented. Young Zara, mashallah. To follow up with Niraj Saab's, sort of, my question is, with your memoir, and I'm an activist, and I'm also an author. I write for mainline papers as a guest columnist. Is there a goal of bringing any change in what's happening in India today? What has happened in the past has happened. What's happening today, right here in the United States, and what's happening in India. So, what change do you expect? And again, I'm not very clear about your audience. You know, I wrote a memoir. It's about our Muslim neighbors and immigrants, a memoir. My goal was to educate my neighbors other than leave a trail of my activism, both in Michigan and Florida. I'm new in Washington, D.C. area. So what's the change you expect other than someone described it as an allergy? It's beautifully written and you're beautifully articulated. I wish I had your ability to speak so well. So again, I'm key on keep it short. So
Thank you.
what changed?
Yeah, we got the. So, what is your audience? Again, or what is your objective?
I mean, I think Nisha and I had a very lovely conversation early in this year when we were writing a piece about Shaheen Bagh. And she actually, was it a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference that you brought up? And she told me, about, because I was asking her about like how India is feeling right now for those who are living, right? And she said that there's so much going on, whether it is economically, socially, religiously, politically, that it feels like a tsunami that is constantly hitting you. And I think in the US, you can feel that same sense of there's just a volley of constant attacks on what are human rights and basic, human needs. And she's like, it feels like there's a tsunami coming, and we show up to the fight with a towel. And that all we're able to do is that each of us shows up with our towel, right? And so I think that really resonated with me. And I think in her saying it may have been facetious, but it actually really made sense to me that this is what it means to live in a moment like the present one, whether it is in India or in America. You are going to come and show up every day with whatever tools you have, whether it is craft, whether it is language, whether it is poetry, it is art. or it is activism and being out on the streets. And these things are not exclusive. You can very much be a combination of all of these. In my case, I always think back to the fact that, again, for a state like Gujarat, where education levels were so low, specifically girl child education was so low, for me to have had the privilege and to be lucky enough, right, to have not only a convent education, but the best choices in terms of school, to have access to novels and literature at a young age, to be shown the best of cinema, to be taken to these shrines and these dargahs and explained poetry in these ways, to be taken to Gujarati, like Hasya Kavi, comic writers in the night, and listen to Gujarati poets, to have been imbued with this sort of richness leaves me with a certain privilege. I wouldn't call it a burden, but a certain privilege then, that even when I leave Gujarat, even when I leave India, what am I bringing back with all of that wealth that I have accumulated, right? And this is privilege of caste, this is privilege of color, this is privilege of place. And so for me, the work then is, how do I put my craft in service of whatever is in front of me? So for me, the book was not necessarily about, here, this is going to change everything. In fact, I remember my publisher wanting to time it with the elections in India last year, and I refused, because there is no point trying to just sort of drive straight into the storm when it's going to, again, just annihilate you. But what you do is you leave behind a register, you leave behind a document that fills the gaps in history, that goes back, and every time they erase, you write it back in, and they erase it and you write it back in. And that becomes the job of the writer. So for me, that's my towel in front of the tsunami right now, that if you erase it, I'll just come back with all the things I've learned and write it back. Thank you.
Rafat, you are unmute.
Oh, sorry. Nazir Saab, Dr. Nazir Ahmad again, please. I am giving the second chance everyone.
Very brief.
Because the talk is really beautiful. So go ahead, please.
This is a difficult question. That's in defining our identity as Indian Muslims. How do we weave in our Hinduness into our Islamicity? The beautiful projection that you had of the Jali, that's a good simile for the way I see it, because our Muslimness belongs to or comes from the legacy of Amir Khusro and Bulleh Shah and Wali Dakni. That's our legacy. Somehow veered off of that. But somewhere along the line, we lost track of the fact that our roots are Hindu. We are not Arabs. We are not. This happened in Indonesia. When you go make presentations there, you see that beautifully how they have weaved together. But unfortunately, somehow in India, less so. Your comment, please.
Thank you so much. So, for those who haven't read the book, this is not really a spoiler, but it talks about the fact that I was taught Sanskrit in school, and a lot of students, a lot of kids used to take it because it was a highly scoring subject. So if you didn't do well in math, you could take Sanskrit and get 99 out of 100 and, up your average in your 10th boards, especially. For me, as somebody that just loved language, Sanskrit had something in it that spoke to me. I remember coming back from school and just chanting constantly, Ya Devi Sarvabhuteshu Vidyarupen Sanstita, Namastasya, 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 Namo Nama. And the fact that when we think of Saraswati, how many cultures in the world are able to think of a goddess of knowledge, that knowledge rests in the body of a woman? And that she is Vidya Rupen. She is very much the roop of Vidya, right? And you cannot remove, I mean, again, I am from the era of Shah Rukh Khan. You cannot remove the Hindu from the Muslim as you remove, so easily at this point. But I think what has happened to me over time is to also then read news items like the Bajrang Dal now stand outside Garba venues in Gujarat with Gaumutra wanting to put it on Muslims who want to come in and dance. That is an India I don't know how to contend with, because the India for me that I has made me is the one in which I was able to go in and dance, and I did feel like it was Durga Ma who was showing me how to do this dance. In a lot of Muslim households and a lot of Muslim spaces, I might be an outcast because of this. And in many ways, I was always that person on the precipice, being asked constantly, Acha, Zara, but how are you Chowdhary? What is this Chowdhary? What is this Hindu surname? What does this mean? So to have lived in that in-between space actually gives me the space to speak about that experience of what it means to be truly Indian Muslim is to be of the land. And it means that you are not of the state, you are of the land. You chose the land and the land chose you much before the Indian state came into existence. Like my other friend Zehra said, that in Shaheen Bagh, there were dadis who were sitting and nanis who are older than the state of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. So we're living legacies in our bodies again of a place that we all belong to. I mean, think of the fact that you go out on the street today and you try and speak to an average white American and they will look at us and laugh and say, what are you all fighting about? You all have the same color. You all speak the same way. You all have the sad accents. So it's a sort of weird dichotomy in which we have caught ourselves when living in India. So for me, yes, completely. In fact, it is not lost on me that the tree of life is a Buddhist or an African way of thinking. And we're more than just, the Hinduism in us. We're the Christianity in us. I come from Chennai now. I tell people when they ask me, I come from Chennai where Saint Thomas is buried. So for me, it is all of these parts. There is my Dada is Punjabi. He wrote in Nastaliq Urdu script in Punjabi to his family across the border all his life. And he wrote Bulle Shah. And, we have Wali Dakhani, who was Dakhani, but we call him Wali Gujarati because he came and he said, Gujarat ki firak mein tar tar hai dil. And he said that Gujarat has torn my heart and this is where I belong and I want to bleed. So for me, there is no one way of removing the multiplicity. But Indian Muslim is a tag that the state has put on me. And therefore, I now speak with that tag. Thank you.
Unmute करें रफत.
Sorry, again. So I was saying, where does this all wisdom come from at this young age? Unbelievable. So that is amazing. I mean, land versus estate. Whatever.
This is true. This is true.
What a beautiful definition. Never thought about that. Unbelievable. Okay, Neeraj Saab, you have last few word, and then we will turn over to Dr.
This is just to complement or supplement what Zara just said, that in Sanskrit she finds a woman deity who represents the Vidya, she's goddess of knowledge. But I would say in Sanskrit, this entire thing, entire power and knowledge is vested or found in women only. There is one shlok, Yatra Naryasya Pujyante Ramante Tatra Devta. जहाँ नारी की पूजा होती है वहां देवता का वास होता है. तो नारी की पूजा डजंट मीन उसके सामने दिया अगरबत्ती धूप जलाना है. उसकी इज्जत करना, to give her due respect and due place in the society is worship of a woman. So we Indians very strongly believe in respect to women, and we see our moksha in womanhood only, in women only. इसीलिए ये जो श्लोक इन्होंने विद्या रूपेण संस्थिता पढ़ा, ये दुर्गा सप्तशती के 5वें अध्याय से है. और उसमें आप देखेंगे कि दुर्गा के बहुत सारे रूप हैं. विष्णु मायती शब्दिता, निद्रा रूपेण, लज्जा रूपेण, क्षुधा रूपेण, मातृ रूपेण, everything.
But Neeraj Saab, we believe, but we never practice.
Yes, we must, देखिए, again We don't believe, everyone does not practice. But
that's
there are people, इसीलिए डॉक्टर हरिवंश राय बच्चन ने कहा, धर्म ग्रंथ सब जला चुकी है जिसके अंतर की ज्वाला, मंदिर मस्जिद गिरजे सबको छोड़ चुका जो मत वाला, पंडित मोमिन पादरियों के फंदों को जो काट चुका, कर सकती है आज उसी का स्वागत मेरी मधुशाला।
बहुत खूब नीरज साहब, आप बस कीजिए।
तो
Thank you
इसलिए
so
हम
much,
लोगों को
Neeraj साहब.
मधुशाला पढ़ने की जरूरत है सर।
Yeah, we got your point. Thank you so much. Once again, all three young girls, beautiful
Ladies.
talk.
Ladies.
Girls,
Yes.
I still call them girls.
There's out of fashion girls.
Enjoy. So thank you so much once again. And this concludes the question and answer session. I am sorry if I missed anyone. I tried to at least cover all the questions. Now back to Dr. Raziuddin for final comment and maybe a question.
Today, I'm sure you can feel it. Rafat has really enjoyed it tremendously, and so are the other ones. I mean, probably seeing all three young Indian Muslim girls, they expected, a certain threshold, but it went so beyond that everybody is really taken back. So it is really wonderful. Presentation was so superb, material depth, everything. It is painful thing to remind, but still there was a lot of beauty. There were a lot of hope. There were a lot of, aspirations in that. I don't know how to say what Nazir Saab said, this Indianness, call it Hinduness. I don't consider it is Hinduness, it is Indianness. Indianness in us is there. Islam is just our religion. I mean, our blood is from the same soil. Long back, majority of them have the same blood, same connections. So at certain point, somebody became somebody. So that's their choice. So those who consider there are two different things, they're not two different things. They are all same. We are as Indian as anybody else. We could be pursuing some other religion, like 15 generation back. My forefathers were Hindus, clearly, but no more. I mean, we are Muslim, but we remain the same Indian. So what is the difference? And as a science background tells, I'm a scientist or a researcher, that long back in India, I think from Tata Institute of Fundamental Research, there was a paper that showed the curiosity was that how much this DNA differs among all Indians. They took the samples from Dalit to Brahmins, from south to north, east to west. The DNA is almost 95% same. So the variations are only 5. So it is the same blood, same DNA. Biology says humans are same. They just migrate. They adopt new religion. They adopt new cultures. India is not the same as 5,000 years back. That was, a culture different than it adopted, 1,000 years back or 2,000 years back. But anyway.
So when is the second book coming so we can invite her?
Or we can say that we can invite her again, the same team, or whatever you want to do. We are very blessed and very happy. And I told our daughter that, Zara shines, Good. Thank you so much. And
okay, good. My senior corrected me that I should not call you guys girls. I should call ladies.
Oh, thank you.
Probably you looked in them, Sharmeen. Sharmeen is his daughter's name.
My very senior, very.
Oh, thank you. Zara, I have a question for you. You were born and brought up in India. But how do you manage to lose the Indian accent? You speak English like an American born and brought up here.
I think it's a convent. She's from.
Yes, she's from
convent. Does not necessarily make.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Amir bhai, it does. Amir bhai, if you go in India.
But I mean, can we let her speak? because I would
Yeah,
like to.
let this guy, other convent guy.
It
you know.
does, it does.
Yeah, there are millions of them in
Yeah,
this
Yeah,
foreign
they teach.
tone, really.
Yeah, but they catch up with different kind of accent.
I
Because
might have, it does help, although at my time, and I think it became different in Zara's time, it was British English that was.
that may be possible,
But
but
it's
she
still-
speaks American English.
We have
Okay,
a
let
friend
her.
from La Martine. She speaks
Yeah,
like
yeah.
But
Okay.
later on, when Americans, started dominating the world, it became the American English. So I think Zara must have picked up
But-
there and then improved over here.
But
Zara
she
had
has
like
no chance to respond.
excellent vocabulary, you know.
Tare bhai, convents are mostly still British and Australian.
Zara is just amusing herself. So what a
Let
discussion.
Zara speak. We've spoken.
Well, you remember one of the pictures that she was showing on
the
the
school.
nativity scene in the church?
You're right.
So they are groomed in that language and the culture.
Yeah.
Even today's Aligarh, you go St. Fridlis and what is the other one? Lady Fatma. I mean,
Yeah.
they are absolutely teaching you all the same.
पर अलीगढ़ की अंग्रेजी को छोड़िए
No, not Aligarh.
Please.
अलीगढ़ की अंग्रेजी
No, Rafat, you are
Let Zara
putting...
speak, but before
No,
Zara speaks,
Rafat, let me correct it. I'm talking about Lady Fatma's and
उसी की बात
that has no
Does he-
bearing,
does he-
nothing to do with Aligarh.
we'll have to
रजी भाई
discuss later.
जितने भी
In look,
स्टाफ
please,
के
dear Rory, let
बच्चे
Zara
हैं,
speak. But before
वो
Zara speaks, one thing, buy her book and read. Anybody who's not bought her book, please buy her book and read.
Yes.
I was lucky enough that my son, who lives in Brooklyn, was about her age, maybe a little bit older, but he recommended a book to me, and it was an excellent book. I'm glad that he did. And then I noticed on the flap, and I called Rosie that it was designed. The cover was designed by Ursh, so it had this personal space for us. But when I read your book, very conversational, and it had, as my son said, it's got two different. The way I figured out the way he put it, stories to it, not just what was happening.
He was here.
So now she needs to make this book popular among oldies like us.
Yeah.
The young
Go
people.
ahead, Zara. Tell us, how did you lose your...
Okay. Well, we are becoming business agents for you. Okay, that's fine.
Anyway, the session has been over for like 5 minutes.
I
So
see.
now
No, you should stop recording then. So this is not on YouTube.
No. This part will be edited.
I see.
Yeah.
I have not
talk.
lost anything. And I take a little bit of umbrage to be told I have an American accent. I think I've learned to mute some of my consonants just because Americans will make you repeat things over and over again, pretending they don't understand you. But again, I'm a filmy child. I can switch to accents and I can switch to registers based on who I speak to.
Wow.
मैं चेन्नई में हूँ तो मैं काइको ऐसा बात करूँ, मैं वैसा बात करूँगी। मुंबई में हूँ तो बोलूँगी क्या रे वटले. So I have got my ways of being in the world. But yes, when it comes to English, it's just again, it's a language I love. The same way that I love Tamil, Urdu, Gujarati, Punjabi, all of these, Sanskrit. So for me, it's when I go to Gujarat or I speak to somebody from Gujarat, I have a very specific way of speaking.
You never performed on stage, right?
Gee, did I perform on stage? I used to direct for stage a little bit. I used to give myself side roles in the background. But no, I've been on stage, yes, a lot through childhood. I was always the kid picked to go and speak because I just had a way of speaking. So
all three are in some way basically stage and documentary.
In the performing arts, yes. I mean, I think that's why I'm so drawn to both of them as well, because they...
Yeah, we need to bring such talents, young, such, especially from your, female side.
क्या अब ड्रामे का इरादा है क्या? अब ड्रामे
men and boys are mostly seen in the lead, but we have to dig out. We don't know many of the new talents coming up in India and all those. So
I do love how many times we've been called young on this call. Thank you. I actually have to rush.